I am thrilled to invite an absolutely extraordinary group of change makers to the stage. They were out there, they are serious, y'all. They were prepping, they had game faces on, they really did their homework for you guys. So please give them a warm welcome to the stage. Baratunde Thurston, come on up.
Yo, yo, yo.
You can just send them all out. Come on out. Come on out. You guys can keep clapping for them.
Yeah, there's more. Keep it.
I told you they did homework for you. So leading the conversation today, we have the brilliant, the very charming Baratunde Thurston. Welcome.
Thank you.
Baratunde has emerged as an essential voice in modern discussions of race and political equity. He is the author of the New York Times best-selling memoir, How to Be Black. It's a great title. And the former supervising producer of The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, my favorite show on television. We are so grateful to have him here to moderate this discussion on transforming systems through trust and healing. And joining him, please help me welcome Sabeel Rahman, Zyahna Bryant, Sarah MORA, and Connie Brownotter. So Sabeel Rahman is the author of several award-winning books on civic empowerment. Zyahna Bryant is a community organizer, a writer, and a college student. Hey, at the University of Virginia. She was also another rock star who was named to our 21 under 21 list at Teen Vogue, which I used to be the editor-in-chief of, if you didn't know that connection. So I see you. Also with us is a DACA recipient and immigrant rights activist, Sarah MORA. Welcome. And finally, we have Connie Brownotter of the Standing Rock Sioux Nation, an indigenous activist and campus leader at Montana State University. Baratunde, I'm gonna turn it over to you to get things started.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elaine. Thank you all for being in the room. We are here to talk about transforming our democracy, healing racial divides, making a more just and equitable future. And I think if we do our jobs right, we'll get it done in time to watch these impeachment hearings, right? So I know it's on everybody's Google Calendar because I put it there because I'm a hacker, because that's what democracy looks like now. It's just hacking. It's just the nerds won, and they're going to destroy us all. Favorite Twitter handle so far, part-time overachiever, which if you really break it down is just achiever. That's how that works. And I encourage all y'all to check out the bathrooms. These are amazing. This is not the Kennedy Center I grew up in the night. They gentrified the Kennedy Center somehow. I didn't even know you could do that with a multi-million-dollar complex, but DC just keeps on DCing. So, welcome everybody. Let's do this. Yes. I will also add, we were hanging out, we were preparing, we did have our game faces on because racial healing is very serious work, and we heard a man humming in the green room. Everybody shut up. The room became silent because his voice was so beautiful. That was Travis just warming up. Can we just give it up for arts being integrated into our program today? We have a lot going on. There are a lot of topics that could take the headline of the year 2020. One of those topics is the census. Because it is an actual constitutionally ordained act that must happen, because it's literally about, if not standing, at least being counted. And I want to hear from this panel about that idea of being seen and being counted. Sabeel Demos, which is the most dope organizational name I've ever heard, is doing real work around the census. Can you help ground us in why, of all the things on the list of stuff to freak out about this year and keep our hands clammy, but also get us out in these streets, why the census matters?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
thanks,
what you're doing,
today.
please.
And thanks so much, everyone, for being here for this important conversation. So if we take a step back for a moment, right, when we talk about racial healing and how do we get out of this current state that we're in, racism is not just about individual bias. It's about power and it's about policy. And we have a democracy that has been historically built to systematically exclude Black and brown folks from political power. Now, that's not a democracy. Now, one of the key ways that we make it a democracy is through things like the census. Now, one of the big tricks that the founders played on us is they put all these hidden things in the Constitution that no one pays attention to that have
Constitutional Easter eggs.
Constitutional Easter eggs, yes. And so in my previous life, I was a constitutional
lawyer. It's all
lawyer.
about framing.
And this is exactly what we would talk about. But the census is one of those things, and it's really critically important because every 10 years, the government counts who's in the country. And it uses that count to inform everything from the drawing of congressional districts to the allocation of funds for schools, for parks, for fire departments, you name it. And this is literally how folks are excluded from being seen, from being counted as part of who counts as we the people. And so one of the big things that many folks have been working on, we were talking about it a little bit in the green room. Dima's super proud to be partnering with an amazing group of organizations sort of spanning all different communities, the Asian Pacific Island Health Forum, the Advancement Project, I know a few folks in here in the room, the NAACP, National Urban League, Faith in Action, the National Congress of American Indians, Unidos US, Race Forward, and I think I've got everyone, but we've been really coming together because this is a decades-long fight, right? If we get, the current estimates are that about 4 million folks, specifically Black and brown folks, will be undercounted or at risk of being undercounted in this census. That is 10, 20, 30 years worth of impact in terms of what happens to our communities, what happens to our democracy. And so this is just one of 50 million forest fires that we are facing right now, but it's a critical one.
Thank you for grounding us in that. I'm going to attempt to weave some of this together. Times it'll be literal, other times a bit more metaphorical. And Zai, if you have things to say about the census particularly, tag it on. But I want to get to why we know your name, or at least your work. You're from Charlottesville. I'm going to quote you right now. All right. That's how we're going to start this section off. Zai is responsible for lighting the spark that became a fire to try to remove these Confederate statues from Charlottesville. It was her letters to the editor, her Change.org petition, which blew up and rallied the community around that effort. Here are some of the words that you wrote, both spoken in an interview or put in your original letter. Quote, "Quite frankly, I am disgusted with the selective display of history in this city. There was more to Charlottesville than just the memories of Confederate fighters. There's more to this city that makes it great." Slight break. "Everything they taught us at school about the Civil War was so romanticized. So I decided to do my own research, which is something my family's always encouraged me to do. Go family. Once I learned the truth about slavery and the Civil War, I felt disgusted that my city wanted to display a statue that celebrated my ancestors' pain." So I would love to just let your words just hang there for another hour as we digested them, but the question comes to this idea of metaphorically being counted and actually being seen. Can you take us on further along this journey of what was bothering you about how your community was representing you to you, and where you are in the journey to try to change that?
So I was 15 when I wrote the petition. And so I'd marched for Trayvon. I organized a rally when I was 12, the day after the verdict came out. And so growing up Black in Charlottesville, there's trauma there. But I've learned a lot, right? When I was 15, I was just let's take down the statue, right? Let's take it down, let's rename the park. I was energized. And then now I'm 19, right? I'm a first year in college. And so the statues are still up. I think that's important to note. But the conversation, it's almost like our environment has changed around our built environment. So we started talking about white supremacy. If we were in a room like this, back when I first wrote the petition, I was like, yeah, white supremacy. People would be like, what? What? Excuse you. But now we're kind of in this era in Charlottesville where people are literally touring the country to talk about white supremacy. So there's been a whole, a movement, right? There's been a shift. And so I think, even to tie it to the census and who's being seen and who has the power to tell these narratives, I think agency is very important. And so I didn't quite understand the politics of telling your story or getting a platform to tell your narrative back when I was 15. But then I noticed, like, even after I wrote the petition, people were like, she co-authored it. I was like, wait a minute, I wrote that, you know? And so, like, I think I've learned a lot about how Black women even have been erased and decentered from their own work. And so just even when I think about how we move as Black people and thinking about Blackness as a monolith, you really have to really like unpack Blackness. And so I just think in the context of being empowered to tell narratives, we have to also think about our differences and how, yes, they make us stronger, yes, they unite us, but they also make us different, and that we have to name those differences. And so, like, my struggles are different from my best friends. We did a New York Times article about the school system in Charlottesville and how she grew up 2 minutes from my house, but she had a totally different experience in our school division. So just thinking about how the achievement gap, how there are these structures that are upheld in ways that keep us separated. So if we don't name those differences, we're not able to understand why we haven't made the progress that we want to, despite the fact that we're still marching, despite the fact that we're still canvassing. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
You did that and then some. Thank you. Thank you. Moving down the line, and we'll get more interactive after this first pass. SARA, MORA, you led an effort around helping tell the story of another population that isn't always counted or seen. People in the United States of America, in so many ways, this country, but without the proper paperwork. That effort was called This Is Our Testimony. And I would love for you to share what, also around the census, but also more metaphorically speaking, tell us about your origin in that work and where it is now. Do you feel more seen? And how do you feel about the effort to be seen and maybe to be counted as well?
Yeah, so I feel like, for one, I didn't realize I was an activist until I started to get into more corporate spaces that acknowledged me as, like, almost a hero for being an activist, which I think was really surreal because a lot of the people that I know who I got admiration from will never write an article, right? Like, they're not in the business of trying to take credit for their work. So when I became an activist, again, I didn't realize I was an activist. And so my story is a little unconventional, where I went viral like a ridiculous amount of times. At 17, I interviewed the president of Costa Rica, which is where I was born, about how diplomatic efforts could actually be sustainable in attempting to create scholarship opportunities for undocumented people at a national level. I think the word national is thrown out a lot in every movement, but particularly for immigrant rights, I was seeing that there wasn't sustainable infrastructure per state for students that were getting out of high school, and there still isn't. So I stopped college in 2017 when Trump rescinded DACA. I just turned 23. So it's been about 10 years of also organizing, but I think I've been able to see a really sustainable change being an activist on the ground and then coming into spaces like this, because you're bringing literally the ground perspective. But where it's frustrating is, again, like, I am supposed to represent many stories when I walk into a space. I'm supposed to represent mothers who do work at the border who, again, are so humble that it's beneath me to even ever try to explain their story. But I think everything is a work in progress, and I think I'm not ready to go back to school because everything just seems to get more intense with immigration reform. And the more I do work on the ground, I realize that I don't really need a bachelor's to organize. Like, I think some of the organizers that I admire the most and historic figures organize without education, and it doesn't mean I don't love school. It just means, like, there is an urgency, and even though I'm undocumented, like, I've personally never felt undocumented. I've just felt like me, and I felt like really frustrated and tired, and like being young and being so aware of that frustration, and then seeing my mom clean houses and my dad fix trucks and my dad get like physically attacked by ICE in places, I think is a story that's very common to immigrant families. And again, these communities are people who will not fight back. There's the language barrier. There's the feeling of, well, I'm already here, might as well just be grateful, even though I'm getting paid like 1/4 of what minimum wage is in places. So I think my organizing stems from a really angry place, to be honest. And I think now that I'm an influencer, it doesn't help because then people are just very, I think there's an image of happiness when it comes to influencer stuff and activism nowadays. And I'm really angry all the time, to be honest. So my conversations end up stirring to a really dark place. And to me, it's just a normal place. So I think, I'm getting used to how hard I've been fighting because I didn't realize it was survival mode. I didn't realize it was what corporations call it. I don't even know what it is at this point, but I'm gonna keep on going. And I think the biggest thing I noticed is that hope is a big tool that I use to continue to build a movement and more inspiration for youth to believe rather than lose hope because of this anger. I think this anger stems from the belief that systematic change can be created by the people who are being oppressed by the system and by communities who are different coming together and realizing the inner commonalities. I want to say so much more, but I'm gonna stop there.
Thank you, and I'm gonna stick with you for one more beat because this is about trust and relationships, the theme of this panel, and we started with the census. And if you could share your perspective to the degree that you have one about counting and the U.S. government and the communities that you are representing and embedded in and working with.
Yeah, I think as I shared earlier, it's a really weird. It's the non-existent relationship because I think I've been asked as an influencer also to address the census, but how can I tell my people to just you know what I mean? How can I tell them and guarantee them that them filling out that paperwork is actually going to help them and not do them worse? And at that, we're a paperwork issue where kids are 18 and they're thinking about just how minimal they can get to not be targeted. So then it's a very nasty, it's a very toxic, it's a very violent relationship that I feel puts me in a position to have to represent a system that I don't know how to defend. But yeah, that's my opinion.
Thank you. Hashtag This Is America. That contradiction is built in, right? Connie Brownotter, thank you for being here. Connie, you heard through some of the introduction. I'll add one other credit to her reel as the president of the American Indian Council in your school, correct?
I was the treasurer.
Treasurer. Well, I just gave you a promotion, so the
I'll
next
take it.
next president of the American Indian Council. We're on a different axis here in terms of the communities that you are from and are representing when it comes to being counted, being seen, building trust, and establishing relationships. Tell us about your origin in the work that you're doing and how you think about this question of trust, relationships, and visibility.
Right. So I was raised on the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. Represent. That's where I'm from. That's where I was raised. And so part of what I have to do as an Indigenous woman representing myself here is to introduce myself in my traditional language. So I'm going to say, ha midakiapi, chante washtea nape chiuzapi, waglihuni wachiwi machiapi, na ilmoslaha hemataha, na Havre, Montana, Elwati. I basically said I'm from Standing Rock, and I live in Havre, Montana, and my name is Waglihuni Wachiwi. It was a name that was given to me when I was a little girl by my grandmother, and it means returning wish. And that's just part of who I am. So I want to introduce myself to you in that way, spiritually connect with you guys on that level, because that's just my identity and part of who I am. And so I can't leave that out in this conversation. So I grew up on the reservation, and I was raised in extreme poverty, and I've seen the effects of settler colonialism in real time, in my real life, amongst my friends, amongst my family, and even in my own personal life. And when I think about being counted and being seen in the Census 2020, it's kind of hard to talk about because indigenous tribes in America, there are actually, last I counted, 573 federally recognized tribes, and there's still many others that are trying to seek that federal recognition but haven't yet done so, haven't been able to. But those ones that are recognized, we have a unique relationship with the federal government in that we relate to each other on a government-to-government basis, and that kind of complicates things when it comes to trust and relationship because historically, there was never trust. There was never a relationship. And things were taken, and they continue to be taken today. And so when I talk about the census, it's challenging because we have to operate within that system to get any kind of justice, any kind of, to honor our treaties, to honor, what the government, the relationship we have for them to provide for us, to help us after everything that we endured through centuries, 500 years of colonization. So when I think about the census and I think about being counted, I read somewhere that Indigenous people are the most marginalized community when it comes to being undercounted in the census by 4.9%. And that information to me is terrifying because we, in part, depend on funding from the government to operate our tribes and to have tribal infrastructures put into place to, enforce our sovereignty and to, build our education systems on tribes, build our healthcare systems on tribes, and build economic development to thrive as a community and to exist in this society successfully. And so I want us to be counted. I want us to be seen. We are not invisible. And in this society, we're sometimes seen as this static figures in history that are still held back in time, but we're here and we're alive and we're thriving and we exist and we haven't gone anywhere. And we're gonna stay here and we have voices that matter. And so this census is gonna help bring light to that. I want all Indigenous communities to do their best to be counted. There are many barriers in this process, language barriers. There are also, a lot of tribes have a difficulty and a challenge getting broadband, internet connection, things like that. And that distrust, people coming to the door wanting to do this information. Why should we allow you in our homes? Why should we do this, give you our information when things in the past, a relationship in the past with the government has never been positive? Things like that. So that's why this conversation we're having here is so vital and so important, to heal these relationships, to mend them, because that's how real change happens. Policy change happens with relationship, with research, and with this census, with this funding, with this representation. So I think, that's kind of my perspective on it and how I kind of came to, work in this area. And just in response to your census question, there's so much more I could say, but that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Thank you. Out the park, right? Out the park. I'm moved by all of your responses so far, sincerely, and I want to follow through on what one does when trust has been broken, when a relationship is frayed. We all on this stage are from communities that can document massive amounts of mistrust, distrust, abuse, exploitation with respect to the nation that we are also a part of. We're still here. We're still going to ascend into the future, as we heard earlier. What have you seen, done, or been a part of where you feel like that was a win? That was we reestablished trust, we broke down a barrier, we built a relationship and moved something forward. Maybe we didn't solve the whole thing, that doesn't often happen in a lifetime, but we took a step forward. And I'll open it to anyone to share a story of something that feels like a step toward maybe success in this realm.
Okay. So in Charlottesville, I think everyone in this room is familiar with the hashtag of Charlottesville. So in Charlottesville, around the times of the rallies and stuff, I think it's important to remember that Charlottesville is still a community. So Black people did what Black people always do, which is build our own tables, build our own infrastructure. And so we really focused a lot on community care and collective care. And so out of that summer of 2017 came Carmel, which is the Charlottesville Anti-Racist Media Liaisons Group. And that group has really been important, when it comes to the question of who's telling these narratives and who has access to platforms, because they basically created a cool streamlining process of allowing media to contact activists of color. So when you saw Charlottesville go viral, you saw a very white perspective, but then the following year, when we were commemorating the year after, you saw a lot of diverse voices. You saw Black women, you saw Black queer people, and so it's really important that those infrastructures are in place to make sure that those people can tell their stories. We also elected our first Black female mayor after August 2017. We've done a lot of work with, raising resources for Black students in the community. So I wouldn't say that like trust was restored, because white supremacists are still white supremacists and Charlottesville is still a racist place. But again, people of color were able to work together to build their own coalitions and build their own tables. And we understood that liberation for Black and brown people is not gonna just come from going to cast a ballot. Like, we have to do the everyday work of showing up to, lobby for our causes and make sure that our people are taken care of.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, just to build on that, one of the things that I think is jumping out for me really strongly, listening to everyone speak on the panel, is that real trust requires an actual commitment to justice, right? It's not just, you can't just call it trust, right?
Is that a branding exercise?
Yeah, right. And a commitment to justice paired with genuine solidarity for across one another's different but critical experiences. And so, I mentioned the groups that we're all working together on the census and on voting rights work. A personal story too. I came into this work. I'm a Muslim American. I'm the anchor baby in my family, right? And after 9/11, and then again after Donald Trump's election, right? That fear that y'all talked about was very real in our house. But a key shift I think we've seen in the Muslim American community, to speak from experience, right, is that there's one response to that, which is just to opt out, right? We're just gonna take care of our community, and we're gonna sort of play the politics of respectability and just, try to distance from the suffering that's happening in other Black and brown communities. That's a choice though, right? Because the other choice is we can recognize how our subordination and vulnerability is actually A, just a fraction of what other folks are struggling with, but B, completely bound up in the way that this country has systematically extracted, exploited, and subordinated Black and brown folks and indigenous folks. And so that means it's our choice to then join the fight, right? And join the fight knowing that each of us in our community is gonna have to stretch in order to really get at the root of all the systems that I think we're all talking about.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes,
Sarah.
So New Jersey is my home state, and it just became the 14th state to pass driver's licenses for undocumented communities. And so when I think of liberation and the revolution in general, I always think about like how short we live and how important it is to acknowledge the needs in the moment, which is like easy to overlook when we're in the fight. That's really big. It's still a really small number. 14 is insanely small. And then financial aid, in-state financial aid for undocumented students. I think there's 11 states so far. So yeah, that's important.
Thank you. There's a giant clock here. Just saw it for the first time. Huge, big countdown numbers. Basically says Baratunde, you're messing up the time. But I'm seeing it now, so I'm gonna, it's not the organizers, it's all me. This is a very special gathering here, and so I'm just gonna take this last question and do a little bit of an audible, because I think you have something to share that'd be deep, personal, emotional, and valuable. Because someone asked me this when I do my talks, and it caught me off guard. And she said, how do you maintain your sanity, your well-being, your mental and spiritual health, given the fight you've chosen to be a part of? So I'm gonna ask that very easy question and be as short or as deep or as personal or as abstract as you need to be to field it.
Well, one thing that really helps ground me in this fight for Indigenous recognition and justice is to recognize that I am standing on the shoulders of those thousands before me who have laid this foundation, who have started this movement, who have put this groundwork into place, and that I'm just a piece in the puzzle. I'm not going to solve everything, I'm just a part of that process, and that humbles me, and that also centers me, and then to feel like I am the embodiment of all of my ancestors' prayers, and they are standing behind me. And I may be one person up here, well, there's 5 of us, but myself individually, I'm just one person, but there's thousands behind me. And they're the ones that are supporting me, and just remembering that I come from that legacy, that long line of resilience and strength. It gives me so much gratitude, and gratitude is that focal point that helps me want to keep moving forward.
I think spending time with family, and I believe in God, so faith and a combination of really spending time being a big sister, being like a daughter, being a youth leader, like just really spending time being next to those people, because I think still within the fight, it's very sometimes easy to let go of everything that actually is the point of why we're fighting, right? To have the possibility of spending time with the people that we love and not having such shortcut, valuable moments.
Yeah, so I think spending time with people I love and like community, like finding people in the community who do similar work can be helpful, because you can like feed off of their energy and they understand why you're drained, why you're upset, why you're angry. But then also I like listening to music, so I'm always looking for the latest album, and I'll just be like, look, today I'm listening to music. Y'all gonna have to wait till tomorrow. And I'm also a writer, as Elaine said, so I write poetry and essays just to decompress, because if no one writes it down, no one's ever gonna know it. So I have to make sure that our stories are documented. But like the point before, I am standing on the shoulders of so many Black women, my mother, my grandmother, my sisters, and so I'm so grounded by the people who have made me the way that I am, for good and for bad.
I'll echo all of those, family of, whether it's your family of choice or your family of birth. I'm usually on the younger end of the panel. At the moment, I'm on the older end of this panel, and being
Welcome
the
to the club,
yes,
homie.
exactly right. I'm making that transition, but I'll just add that part of that is being a new father of an 8-week-old who I say goodbye to this morning as the first trip away from home since she came on, and it just has heightened so much. Both the joys and that sense of urgency, but really want to echo just the need to give space for oneself and one's community, right? I mean, we all feel the urgency, but we have to remember the joy too, right? The joy that we experience and the joy that we're fighting for, and so I think that's really important.
Thank you. And I will add very briefly, meta echo on all of that. For me, it's nature as an additive, like dirt, trees, animals, really the stuff we've tried to bury and strip away and transform to suit our own needs. It's nice to kind of put your hand on another type of living being that was here well before us, and just be humbled by the grandness of life and our very small piece in it. Puppies are great. I don't have one, but I just like looking at them, so internet's real good for that. And to really double down on what you just said, Sabeel, look, this panel's about building trust and relationships, and I think what I've just learned from the half day with y'all and reflecting on the struggles I've had myself, that trust and relationship needs to be established within as well. And so knowing oneself, trusting oneself is essential to being able to do any work on behalf of anyone else and maintain yourself in the process. So I offer that on top of all this other brilliance and genius. Thank you so much. Thank you. Super dope panel. We're at 0. All right. We're going to exit that way.